Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
Hi there guys, it's Adam Martyn here, and this is a very impromptu video. The audio might sound very different. I'm recording this very, obviously sporadically. I'm not by my usual setup or equipment, but I think for the world of like UK radio or just UK media in general, there's been an event recently which has taken many listeners, viewers by surprise. I'm sure most of you already know, but for anyone watching who is a bit out of the loop, DJ Steve WRIGHT, who has been presenting on UK radio for decades, passed away at the age of 69. Now, this was reported, again, very much out of the blue. As far as I'm aware, there'd not been any sort of indication that Steve was, not very well, or that there was anything going on there, but it has recently come to light in the news. So let's just have a quick dive through this article from the BBC itself, which is the broadcaster he spent most of his broadcasting life with, just to get us a bit up to speed, and then I'll get into my general tribute. So DJ Steve WRIGHT, who presented programmes for BBC Radio 1 and Radio 2 for more than 4 decades, has died at the age of 69. His family confirmed his death with deep sorrow and profound regret in a statement on Tuesday. WRIGHT joined the BBC in the 1970s and went on to host the afternoon shows on Radio 1 and Radio 2. He also fronted television programmes for the BBC, including Top of the Pops. Of course, anyone back in the day who remembers those old Top of the Pops episodes would often see Steve pop up on there, but it was radio arguably where he made his name the most established. WRIGHT was last on air on Sunday, the Sunday just gone, hosting a pre-recorded special Valentine's Day edition of his Love Songs programme, which is a programme he stuck to for many years. I guess dishearteningly fitting that Valentine's Day perhaps is now presumably the final edition of that programme. It did make me think, were others pre-recorded, but even if they are, the BBC might choose not to air them as a sign of respect. WRIGHT's family said, "It's with deep sorrow and profound regret that we announce the passing of our beloved Steve WRIGHT. In addition to his son, Tom, and daughter, Lucy, Steve leaves behind his brother, Lawrence, and his father, Richard. Also much-loved close friends and colleagues, and millions of devoted radio listeners who had the good fortune and great pleasure of allowing Steve into their daily lives as one of the UK's most enduring and popular radio personalities. As we all grieve, the family requests privacy at this immensely difficult time," which people should absolutely give them. A lot already are already asking, how did he die? What were the circumstances? Why were the public not told? And at the end of the day, it's none of our business. Even though these are media personalities, celebrities or whatever, they are fully entitled to keep aspects of their life private. Now, it may well come out that Steve's death was very sudden. There are points later on that we'll talk about that maybe imply it was quite a sudden passing, but equally, even if it wasn't, say if he had been ill or he knew that he wasn't in the best of health, it's completely up to him with whom he wants to reveal that to. There's no obligation for him to reveal it to the public. So I think being respectful to the family and obviously showing our tributes, our respect, is the right thing to do right now. Speaking of that, paying tribute to WRIGHT after his death was announced, an emotional Radio 2 presenter, Sarah Cox, said,
"It's really hard to know what to say about the news of Steve WRIGHT's passing, except we are all absolutely devastated and shocked and blindsided by this news. Steve was an extraordinary broadcaster, a really, really kind person. He was witty, he was warm, and he was a huge, huge part of the Radio 2 family. And I know my fellow DJs will all be absolutely shattered too. And I imagine you're feeling sad too, and we are here for your messages. If you'd like to reach out, if you'd like to share your thoughts or memories about Steve, please do on 88291, because we've all lost a lovely friend who's been a big part of our lives for so many years. So we're going to try and do Steve proud for the rest of the show, and we're going to play the music that he loved so much."
And again, fair play to Sarah Cox, because trying to pay tribute not just to a colleague, but also what was clearly a very dear friend, whilst also trying to, continue with your radio program. Obviously, you're allowed to show some emotion, but, keeping the program going. absolutely fair play to Sarah Cox. It's a position that, you know, absolutely no one in any workplace, but especially something as public as the radio, would want to be in. The Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, also got involved with the tribute, saying, "All of us at the BBC are heartbroken to hear this terribly sad news. Steve was truly a wonderful broadcaster who has been a huge part of so many of our lives over many decades. He was the ultimate professional, passionate about the craft of radio, and deeply in touch with his listeners. This was deservedly recognised in the New Year's Honours list with his MBE for services to radio," which, again, very fitting indeed. It goes on to say, "No one had more energy to deliver shows that put a smile on audiences' faces. They loved him deeply, and we're thinking of Steve and his family, and we'll miss him terribly." Again, a very succinct comment from the Director General there. And a bit about Steve. He was born in Greenwich, South London in 1954. Wright's career at the BBC began when he started working as a clerk, and his broadcasting career began in 1976 when Wright had left the BBC to join Thames Valley Radio. So again, at the time of his passing, he'd been on the air for around 48 years, coming up to the big 50. That's an impressive run for anybody. 4 years later, he joined BBC Radio 1, the flagship station, presenting weekend programmes before launching Steve Wright in the Afternoon in 1981, the show that would ultimately define his career. After a brief stint hosting the Radio 1 breakfast show for a year from 1994, Wright left to join Talk Radio, but rejoined the BBC in 1996. So even though he dabbled with other broadcasters, he always seemed to come back to the good old British Broadcasting Corporation, and that's arguably the station, he was most associated with too. He began presenting a Saturday programme and Sunday Love Songs on Radio 2 from 1996, before launching his afternoon show in 1999, and a slot he would keep until 2022. So he did that slot for 23 years, which again is a staggering amount of time to be, hosting a long-running show like that. But he was dearly loved, that people loved that programme. Scott Mills took over the afternoon programme during a string of schedule changes at the station in 2022, but Wright did stay with Radio 2, continuing to present Sunday Love Songs as well as a series of specials and podcasts, and Radio 2 said it planned to celebrate Wright's life with a range of programming across the station. So very much tributes seem like they're already lined up for Radio 2 there. And yet Steve Wright in the Afternoon, big show here in the UK, always broadcasting in the afternoon slot, the coveted afternoon slot as it were. Was it 2 p.m. till 5 p.m. I think he did? And this was on every single weekday. This was beloved by millions, either finishing up work or whilst at work. And Steve's energy, I mean, if you ever listened to him, as I'm sure many of you did, he always had that very upbeat personality to him, a very upbeat style about him, very positive person, and clearly had a passion for either like the subjects he talked about or particularly the music he played. He championed a lot of music over his career across all kinds of genres as well. And the same goes for his Sunday Love Songs program. I mean, that show was ultimately defined him as well. There were CDs released, which were basically compilations of love songs, but they carried that Steve Wright branding. I mean, I know we've got one in the family home, but he was a consummate broadcaster, one who maybe never overexposed himself in the way that some celebrities do across any medium. But he was, even if he didn't overexpose himself, it's the sense of everyone, or like millions, anyone you talk to, you'd know who Steve Wright was. You could sing that jingle, either Steve Wright in the Afternoon or Sunday Love Songs. A very consummate broadcaster indeed. In terms of my experience with Steve Wright, it was mainly the Steve Wright in the Afternoon I'd catch him on, and again I thought he blended in really well with the schedule and the other broadcasters at that time. This very jolly man, this very enthusiastic man, willing to make people smile, make people laugh, and something that's been echoed by various other people who've paid tribute, but he just made it seem effortless. He made it seem like this was not a big deal, that this was the easiest thing in the world to him. And I guess in many ways, or at least he didn't show if it was difficult, but it did seem like it. Just to bring up a tribute here from Scott Mills, who again took over the afternoon slot from him. He put, "Steve Wright is one of our greatest ever broadcasters. He made everything sound effortless and worked so hard to make every show world class. He was a constant inspiration to me on how to do radio that sounded big. And when I first started doing shows at Radio 2, he and I spent hours reminiscing about his days at Radio 1, and I would listen to his stories and wisdom in awe. My thoughts are with his family and my colleagues who have worked with him for so many years. Steve, You're the best to ever do it. Naturally, now with Steve gone, it does raise the question of who's going to, well, take over that slot. You know, I highly doubt the BBC are going to keep it as Sunday Love Songs. I mean, who knows? Either they keep it as Sunday Love Songs with a new host, or they replace it with an entirely new show. I'm not exactly sure at the minute what I'd do if I was in that situation, because I guess you could easily continue Love Songs just with a new presenter, but I think that show is so ingrained, that sort of style is so ingrained with Steve Wright, that I think it'd be very hard, now and impossible, to follow that up. So I think replacing it maybe with an original new block of something might be the better option for Radio 2 to take, but we'll have to see. This also raises the question of Pick of the Pops, which is another popular show that airs on Radio 2. And Steve Wright took over from Paul Gambaccini. Now, Paul Gambaccini had done Pick of the Pops for years, but Steve took over in the October of 2023. So, again, that's a bit different to Love Songs, I think. You know, it's not one Steve originated, so I think another broadcaster could come along and pick up Pick of the Pops from him. But yeah, I mean, Sunday Love Songs, that is Steve. How on earth do you follow that without Steve, you know? He was also somewhat of a musical man. It seems he was involved with various groups and stuff like that. His biggest hit being I'll Be Back, which was performed by Arnie and the Terminators. Yes, you're hearing that right. Apparently, Steve is on the backing band to that. It reached number 5 in the UK singles chart. Now, is this a good song?
You don't need please or thank you. You just need I'll be back.
It's unique. Let's put it that way. It's very, very unique. But, you know, it seems like it was just up for a bit of fun, you know, really up to make people laugh, make people smile, and ultimately dedicated and passionate for his craft. Again, he will be very much missed by the millions of listeners that he had, but no more so than by his family and close friends. And again, I think we need to be respectful of that. I'm sure in time details will come out surrounding his death, again, whether that was a sudden death or if it was something that was, you know, I guess primarily anticipated, but again, we don't know that yet, and we shouldn't go digging or prying from the family and friends to find out. We should just wait and see what comes out in due time. But that is all for this video. Again, I just wanted to pay my tribute, my respect to Steve Wright, talk a bit about his life and his career, and just to emphasize, again, particularly if you're not from the UK watching this, how much of a loved radio personality Steve Wright was, and again, one who'll be sorely missed. But that is all for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.